A man sits in a soundproof room. He cannot see. The two halves of a ping-pong ball taped over his eyes turn the world into a soft, blank pink. He cannot hear. The headphones are playing a steady wash of white noise that swallows every other sound. He cannot touch the person he is supposed to be receiving from. That person is in another building, in another room, staring at one of 4 images a computer chose at random. The man in the chair could be you. The protocol does not care. For 30 minutes, the man describes whatever drifts through the pink light behind his eyes. Then they show him the 4 pictures, and he points to one, the way you would if you were sitting in his chair. He is right about 30% of the time. Chance says he should be right 25%. The difference between those two numbers, the gap a skeptic dismisses with a shrug, is the most stubborn fact in modern psychology. 5% over chance, across 4,700 sessions, trillions to one against luck. And the man in the room could be you. He is, in most variations of this experiment, what you are, an ordinary person with no special training, picking up a quiet signal you have been told does not exist. The scientist who has watched this number refuse to die for 50 years is a Princeton-trained physicist named Dean Radin. He has worked at Bell Labs, run experiments at the University of Edinburgh, and is now the chief scientist at an institute most people have never heard of. In 2025, he published a book titled The Science of Magic: How the Mind Weaves the Fabric of Reality. Even though Radin is at the forefront of researching magic from a scientific standpoint, he keeps a bent soup spoon on his desk to remind himself how little he understands. In this video, 3 things. You will see what the laboratory has caught, in numbers a statistician cannot deny. You will see why every one of those experiments is about a quiet ability you have already used and dismissed. And you will leave with 3 categories, 3 names, that let you sort every strange experience you have ever had into something you can think clearly about. Ready? Let's do it.
This is an artificially aware original production.
That 5% is the entry point. Not because it is impressive, it is not. A skeptic will tell you correctly that 100% telepathy would be impressive. 5% over chance is barely there. It is a faint glow at the edge of a screen. It is a number you could miss if you were not looking for it. But it does not go away. It did not go away in the 1970s, when the experiments began. It did not go away in the 90s, when 6 independent laboratories ran the protocol and confirmed it. It did not go away in the 2010s, when researchers selected for people with prior psychic experiences and the number jumped to 45%. It is still there, quietly, across 50 years and thousands of trials, refusing to behave like a fluke. Radin's argument is simple. There is a difference between the existential question, does this exist, and the efficacy question, how big is it? Skeptics confuse the two. They look at 5% over chance, decide that it is not big enough to matter, and walk away. taking your permission to think about it with them. The trillions-to-one statistics that say the effect is real never enter the conversation. But the effect is the thing. The size of the effect is the next question. And the effect divides into 3 categories, 3 names: old names, dressed up in new equipment. The first category is divination. In the magical tradition, this was tarot, scrying, dream reading, augury. In the laboratory, it has different names: telepathy, clairvoyance, remote viewing, presentiment, precognition. The vocabulary changed. The thing being measured did not. You have done it. Almost everyone has. The most commonly reported psychic experience in the world is not levitation or seeing ghosts. It is a precognitive dream. You dream of someone you have not spoken to in a year, and they call you the next morning. You wake up with a sense of dread before the phone rings with bad news. You think of a song and it comes on the radio. You laugh and tell yourself it is a coincidence, because that is what you were taught to do. Radin's lab measured the same thing, not as a coincidence, as a signal. The classic experiment is called Ganzfeld, German for whole field. The man in the pink light at the beginning of this video is in a Ganzfeld chamber. The protocol is 60 years old. The total number of sessions run by different research groups worldwide is now in the tens of thousands. The hit rate, across all of them, sits stubbornly above chance. When you select for people who have already had spontaneous psychic experiences, or who have a close emotional bond with the sender, the hit rate rises into the 40s and 50s. Not the kind of numbers you can hand-wave away, the kind of numbers that would make any other field of psychology celebrate. So why have you never heard of this? Because saying the words out loud carries a professional cost. Because the academic culture in the United States and Europe treats this material the way it once treated continental drift or hand-washing in hospitals, as something a serious person does not discuss. In India, Radin notes, the reaction is the opposite. He has lectured at universities there where academics ask him why he is wasting his time running experiments. They already know it is real, the same data, the same effect, 2 cultures, 2 responses. The phenomenon is not changing. The permission to see it is. There is another version of this experiment that should never have worked. It is called Presentiment. The viewer sits in front of a screen. Every few seconds, the computer flashes an image, sometimes a neutral image like a chair, sometimes an emotionally charged one like a snake or a car crash. The computer chooses randomly. The viewer's skin conductance is being measured. Their pupils are being measured. Their heart rate is being measured. Here is the strange part. The body reacts to the emotional images before the computer has chosen them. The arousal response, the small spike in skin conductance that tells you something startled the nervous system, shows up a few seconds before the image appears. Across multiple labs, across thousands of trials, the body somehow is leaning into the future and flinching at what it sees there. The window is small, milliseconds to about 10 seconds, sometimes longer in remote viewing protocols where trained subjects describe locations or events that have not happened yet. Months in some cases. Verified after the fact. This is not a metaphor. This is a measurement. Your nervous system, the thing you call you, is not strictly locked to the present moment. It is bleeding forward in time by a few seconds, in ways that can be picked up by skin sensors and a stopwatch. You have felt this. The moment before the car in front of you brakes hard, you have already begun to release the gas. The instant before someone says something cruel, the air feels different. You have called these things hunches and chalked them up to micro cues. Maybe some of them are. The data says some of them are not. When you next get that feeling, the one that has no source you can point to, you are not being superstitious. You're picking up signal from a window the laboratory has now measured. The second category is enchantment. In the old language, this meant casting a spell. In modern terms, manifestation, mind over matter, intention. The laboratory name is Psychokinesis, often abbreviated PK, or more soberly, mind-matter interaction. This is the one that makes a physicist nervous. Because if it is real, the wall between the inner world and the outer world, the wall on which most of modern science is built, has a door in it. Radin has spent the better part of 2 decades trying to find the door. Here is the experiment. You shine a laser through 2 narrow slits in a barrier, microns wide. On the other side, you put a screen. The laser, against intuition, does not produce 2 dots. It produces a striped pattern of light and dark bands, what physicists call an interference pattern. The pattern only exists because in the quantum world, the laser is behaving as a wave, exploring both paths at once. Now, and this is the part that has tortured physicists since 1927, the moment you measure which slit the photon went through, the interference vanishes. The wave collapses into a particle. The act of observation changes the result. Nobody knows why. The most famous interpretation, proposed by John von Neumann, refined by Eugene Wigner, both of them giants of 20th century mathematics and physics, is that consciousness itself does the collapsing. Your consciousness, the thing you call you, looking out from behind your eyes, that awareness is the thing that turns possibility into actuality. Most physicists treat the interpretation as too weird to mention in public. A few, quietly, have tried to test it. If they are right, you are part of how the universe collapses possibility into actuality every time you open your eyes. Radin is one of them. And in 2023, he ran the version of this experiment that broke open his career. He recruited 100,000 applicants online. He filtered them through questionnaires, attention tests, video interviews. He was looking for 2 groups, experienced meditators and practicing magicians. People who had spent years training their attention inward and people who had spent years training their attention outward. 50 made it through, about 25 in each group. He built small interferometer boxes, laser, slits, photo detector, and shipped 1 to each participant. Their job, sitting at home in front of the box, was simple. For 30 seconds, focus your intention on the apparatus. For 30 seconds, relax. Repeat. The detector recorded the light pattern the entire time. The meditators produced a tiny effect, just barely measurable. The magicians collapsed the wave function at odds of 4-quadrillion-to-1 against chance. 4-quadrillion-to-1. This is not a marginal anomaly. This is a number that, in any other field, would be a Nobel Prize. 2 groups of equally serious practitioners, both trained for years in disciplines that look identical from the outside, and one of them moves a needle in the physical world while the other does not. Radin's theory of why is interesting. Meditation, he says, is an inward practice, attention pointing in. Magic, in the working tradition, is an outward practice, attention pointing out, toward an object, a candle, a sigil, a goal. When you ask both groups to influence a box out there, the people who trained on out there win. The skill is real, and the skill is specific. You have parts of this skill in their dormant form. You have wished for a parking spot and gotten one. You have stared at someone across a room and watched them turn around. You have noticed that things go well in the periods when you are thinking clearly and badly in the periods when you are spiraling. You have called these things confirmation bias, and sometimes they are. The data says they are not always. The mechanism is small. The mechanism exists, and it appears to be trainable. Decades ago, Radin attended what was called a PK metal bending party. The premise was absurd on its face. A group of people, mostly amateurs, would sit in a room with cutlery, attempt to enter an altered state, and try to bend the spoons with their minds. He went in as a skeptic. He left with a spoon. It is a heavy soup spoon, the kind that takes serious force to bend even with both hands. He bent it between two fingers, with pressure that should have broken his knuckles before it touched the steel. He remembers the moment clearly. He remembers more clearly that he had no idea how he had done it. He keeps the spoon on his desk. He calls it a paranormal object. He says, with a scientist's careful phrasing, that he keeps it there to remind himself that the limits of what is possible are not where he was told they were. He is not selling you a technique. He is showing you a piece of bent metal he cannot explain. You have one of these too. A story you do not tell at dinner parties because you cannot make it sound serious. The clock that stopped the moment your grandmother died. The object that moved when no one was in the room. The dream that named the name. You have filed it under coincidence, or under I must have misremembered, because the alternative does not fit the world you were told you live in. Radin's argument is not that every such story is real. It is that the threshold for dismissing them is set far too low by a culture that has decided in advance which experiences are allowed to count. The spoon sits on his desk. It is permanent. It is impossible. It is also just a spoon. The third category is the one that makes you, and almost everyone else, most uncomfortable. In the old language, it is called Theurgy. It refers to the practice of working with what the practitioners describe as non-physical intelligences, spirits, deities, ancestors, archetypes. In the modern lab, it shades into research on channeling, intention transmission, and what Radin calls blessing studies. Stay with this. The experimental work is more careful than the framing suggests. The first study he ran involved chocolate. Small pieces of chocolate, blessed by a Mongolian shaman and a Buddhist monk, were sent to participants under double-blind conditions. The participants did not know whether they were eating blessed chocolate or unblessed chocolate. They ate it. They reported their mood for the next week, the way you would in the same study, with no clue which group you were in. The blessed group reported significantly elevated mood. The results survived peer review. The reviewer, a well-known neuroscientist named Jim Fallon, later wrote that he had to read the paper 5 times before accepting it. The methodology was airtight. The statistics were appropriate. The blinding was correct. He did not believe the result, but he could not find anything wrong with it. He approved publication. Radin and his collaborators extended the study. Blessed tea. Same effect on your mood, even when you did not know your tea had been blessed. Blessed water used to grow plants. The plants did better. Blessed water used to feed stem cells in culture. The cells thrived. Blessed water used on glioblastoma cancer cells in a petri dish. The cells died at a higher rate. Same protocol, same double blind, different targets, consistent results in the direction of the intention. What is going on here is not provable from the outside. Radin would be the first to admit that. The mechanism is unknown. The effect sizes are small. The studies need to be replicated. There is no theory yet that explains why a piece of chocolate held in a monk's hands for 15 minutes should land differently in a stranger's nervous system a week later. But the data exists, and the implications, if it holds, are unsettling. Particularly for the people who run blessing rituals professionally and have been told for centuries that what they are doing is symbolic. The studies suggest it is not entirely symbolic. The studies suggest that intention leaves a residue on objects, and that the residue can be detected by other nervous systems, and that the residue can shift the behavior of cells in a dish. None of this requires the belief of the person receiving it. The chocolate eaters did not know which group they were in. You have done versions of this without naming it. The meal someone made you with care tasted different than the same meal eaten alone. The object you were given by a dying parent feels different in your hand than an identical one from a thrift store. The bed you sleep in after a fight does not feel like the bed you slept in the night before. You have called this projection. You have called it memory. You have called it imagination. Maybe. Some of it almost certainly is. Radin's experiments are pointing at a quiet possibility, that some of it is not, that a small portion of what looks like projection is actually pickup, that objects retain a faint signal of the attention they have received, that the world, at some low level you have been told to ignore, is more alive than the cold physics version of it can account for. One of the most striking moments in Radin's career happened with a single participant in one of his earliest interference experiments. The man was a Swami, head of a yogic society, 70 years of daily meditation behind him. Radin explained the experiment. The box would be in a shielded room, 2 floors away. The Swami's job was to focus his attention on it and influence the photons inside. The Swami did it. His result was extraordinary, far beyond anything Radin had seen from ordinary participants. When the trial was over, Radin asked the question every honest experimenter asks: how did you do it? How did you project your mind into the shielded room and into the apparatus 2 floors away? The Swami looked at him. "I did not go anywhere," he said. Radin pressed. "What do you mean?" "I went inside, because the universe is inside." It is the kind of answer a Westerner trained in physics laboratories has been taught to discount as poetic. Radin had the same training. He took the answer seriously anyway, because the Swami's interpretation maps almost exactly onto certain interpretations of quantum mechanics, where the distinction between observer and observed dissolves at the deepest level, where every measurement is a relationship, not a separation, where the line you have been taught to draw between in here and out there is convenient for ordinary life and false at the level the physics is trying to describe. The Swami was not making a metaphor. He was describing how he did the experiment. You have touched this. In moments of stillness, staring at the ocean, holding a child, looking up at a sky you forget to look at, you have felt the seam come loose. The inside and the outside briefly stop being separate. You have been trained to call this a feeling. The Swami calls it a fact. The data is closer to the Swami's side than your training has let you admit. There is a story Radin tells about the magicians versus meditators study that should not work and does. He had the design. He had the participants. You can guess what happened next, because you have lived versions of this in your own work. The colleague who was going to build the interferometer boxes and pay the $25,000 materials cost pulled out at the last minute. The funding evaporated. Radin had a grant that was going to pay for 1/2 of the work, but not for the boxes. He was about to cancel a study he had spent 2 years preparing. A week later, while he was still sitting with the problem and no solution in sight, an email arrived from a European group he had never heard of. Their name was RENCEP, the Research Network for the Study of Esoteric Practices. They were inviting him onto their advisory board. He accepted. He asked what they had in mind for scientific collaboration. They had, they said, 25,000 euros set aside for a single experiment. Did he have a proposal? He sent them the proposal that afternoon. They funded it. 25,000 euros, slightly more than $25,000 at the exchange rate, the exact amount he needed. From an organization devoted to the study of magic, arriving precisely when his magic experiment was about to collapse. He puts this in the book, dryly, as in typical magical fashion. You have one of these stories too. The job offer that arrived the week you were going to break. The stranger who said the sentence you needed to hear, in the language you needed to hear it in, the morning after you asked the question. You have called these coincidences. You have called them luck. You have called them anything except what the magicians and the Swami and the parapsychologists call them. Confirmations that the model you were handed, where everything is separate and nothing reaches anything else, is missing pieces. Maybe they are coincidences. Maybe some of them are not. If you're a skeptic listening to all of this, you will say, fine, 5% over chance, tiny effect sizes. Most of these studies cannot be replicated with 100% reliability. If any of this were real, we would all be reading minds and bending spoons and curing cancer with our intentions. The fact that we are not means the effect is either fake or trivially small. Radin's answer is the aspirin analogy. Aspirin is in your medicine cabinet right now. Almost certainly, it has been used as a medicine for hundreds of years. Its mechanism, how it actually works in the body, was not understood until the 1970s. When you measure the effect size of aspirin in modern clinical trials, it is tiny. So tiny that if aspirin were submitted to the FDA today as a new drug, with its small effect and its side effects, it would probably not be approved. But aspirin works. The effect is small. The effect is real. The effect is medically meaningful at scale. The smallness of the effect tells you nothing about the reality of the effect. The other analogy he uses is Benjamin Franklin. In the 1740s, Franklin was flying kites in storms and seeing tiny sparks at the end of the string when lightning struck nearby. He had no idea what the sparks were. Neither would you in the same field with the same data. He could not have guessed that 200 years later your entire civilization would run on those sparks, refined, channeled, multiplied a billionfold. He could not have guessed that the small thing he was watching was the entire next era of human capability, waiting to be understood. What Radin is showing you is sparks. The mechanism is unknown, the theory is incomplete, the replication problem is real. None of that is an argument against what is being seen. It is an argument for understanding it better. The skeptic who looks at 5% over chance and decides nothing is happening is making the same mistake Franklin's contemporaries made when they watched the sparks and saw nothing useful. You are living at the beginning of something, not the middle, not the end, the beginning. Messy experiments and small effects are exactly what you would expect at the beginning of a field, not evidence that the field is empty. Here's what to carry out of this video. You do not need to believe anything. Belief is not the takeaway. 3 names are: Divination, your mind reaching across space and time, the dream that comes true, the premonition of danger, the hunch you cannot explain. The next time one of these happens, you do not need to call it a coincidence, and you do not need to call it destiny. You can call it what the laboratory now calls it, a divinatory event of unknown size with a measurable signature in the nervous system. You can note it, you can write it down, you can see if it repeats. You become an observer of your own data. Enchantment, your intention influencing the world outside your skin. The wish that worked. The focused attention that bent a small piece of a system you were not touching. The next time you notice this, the moment when concentrated attention seems to produce a small disproportionate result, you do not need to dismiss it and you do not need to inflate it. You can call it enchantment, you can note it, you can see what conditions amplify it. Theurgy, your awareness reaching into something that does not have a body in the ordinary sense. The presence in the room after a death. The voice that gave you the answer in the dream. the blessing that landed. You do not have to settle the metaphysics. You can use the category as a sorting tool, a place to put experiences you would otherwise have to discard. The skeptic who told you these experiences were impossible was working from a physics that is 100 years out of date. The skeptic who told you they were delusions was working from a psychology that was never tested against the people having them. The skeptic was confident. The skeptic was also wrong about the things you have already lived through. You do not need to believe Radin. You need to stop letting other people tell you what you have already experienced did not happen. The man in the soundproof room is still there. He has been there for 50 years. He sits with the ping-pong balls over his eyes and the white noise in his ears and the small pink light behind his lids. And he is right about 30% of the time when he should be right 25. 5% over chance. Trillions to one against luck. The most stubborn fact in modern psychology. He is not exceptional. He is not chosen. He is a college student picking up a flyer for extra credit. He is your neighbor. He is, in most of the variations of this experiment that have ever been run, completely ordinary. He is you, in a room. So here is the question. What is your 5%? Where in your life has the number refused to behave like chance? The dream that named the name. The phone that rang the second you thought of them. The object that moved. The blessing that landed. The hunch that saved you. Tell me in the comments. Specific. One incident. The one you have never told because it does not fit the world you were told you live in. The stubborn ones add up.